Hello and welcome to Newslaundry Interviews. Today we have with us Shoma Chaudhury, the Managing Editor of Tehelka. Shoma, to begin with, I'd just like to ask you about this raging debate that has got into focus. What is the reporter's role or the media's role? The Assam molestation case. What side of the debate are you on, in case you are on one side? Is a reporter just there to shoot and tell the story, or to actually interfere and stop whatever he sees as unjust or unfair?
You know, I think the debate is not really about that, because with just that premise, I would say, yeah, a reporter can shoot an event that is happening and not intervene. You know, and the reaction will differ in different circumstances. You know, for instance, if there's a riot going on, you shoot it. It's not that you can intervene and stop a riot. An incident like this, where a young girl is being hurled from person to person in a mob, perhaps, you know, you could intervene, but even there is a danger of the mob turning on you, and there is also the role that you're really a recorder of events. You're not the police, you're not an intervener. So I don't think that that's really what is the difficult part of what happened in Guwahati. We have just done a cover story on it, and I think it's a much darker thing actually, in terms of what the media did in that particular case. And you know, Akhil Gogoi raised this issue of whether the journalist actually instigated the mob to amplify the violence so that his camera could feed off it. And I think, you know, we've just done a cover story based on raw, unedited footage that we've seen. And I can't absolutely verify that the journalist did that, but there is a very, very strong conjecture that he did, because what you see on the unedited tape is a voice very close to the clip. You know, he was the person who actually was shooting on the phone in the beginning before his cameraman arrived. And you can hear a voice very, very clearly in that camera. So it's close to him saying, you know, okay, now the cameras arrived. Now the cameras arrived. Strip her more. Make her naked.
Is that right?
And you know,
you've heard this yourself?
Yes, we have, and it's part of the cover story. And that is very much the conjecture. The police have, you know, are also
voice
theorizing
samples
that.
And stuff. Okay.
Yeah. So as I'm saying, I don't want to say this categorically because the forensics haven't happened. The voice matching.
But there is a voice that is saying it.
Yes.
That is sufficiently close to camera.
Yes, very close to camera, and you know, the journalistic fraternity there, you know, not off record, but are saying that yes, it sounds like his voice, and you can't say that. Again, I'm repeating that I can't verify that, but there's a very strong conjecture. The police is following that line now. The Chief Minister himself has said, you know, how can something carry on for 45 minutes without... So that's one dark strand, which I'd like to come back to later.
Which is not a really...
I mean, there's nothing to do about that. It's just crossing of all boundaries, you know. But let's for a moment assume that that did not happen. I still think the camera's role in that molestation case is very disturbing. It's a moment for all of us to really introspect about what the electronic media is doing, both to the audience and to itself. And I'll tell you why, because when you look at that footage, you'll see that the molesters are in a kind of a semicircle, and the camera completes that circle.
They're making space.
There is a sun gun. The molesters are smiling brazenly into camera. They're repeatedly yanking the girl's hair so that the camera can get a full gaze of the girl's face. There is absolutely no fear. There's no shame. There's a triumphant spectacle. And that is, I think, where we need to introspect, you know, that what is this insidious relationship that has built up between, you know, those who perform for camera, and what are we doing as media that has broken down that sense of fear that should happen to any mob that is pretty much raping a young girl, that even when the media is recording you, you're unafraid.
So is that a comment on the media, or is that a comment on the people who are empowered to take action?
It's not about the empowered to take action. I'm saying we do have to understand what was that camera doing there. You know, was there a great degree of comfort? Why was the camera not a disruptive element? What moral force have we lost that even when a TV camera crew turns up on an incident like that, I would imagine molesters would scatter, that you would be afraid to be picked up by the camera. But I think because in many ways, and that is what I think one needs to explore, yes, you know, punitive measures are not taken, but I think also because of the kind of media circus that we have made of ourselves. You know, very often things are bloated out of context. They are, you know, you amplify things. There's a magnification that happens, and then the storm passes on, you know, and there is no residues of this. So in many ways,
it's just a
the
spectacle from
camera's
spectacle.
eye has lost its moral
So do you
edge.
think it moves from
you know?
spectacle to spectacle, and people perform for that spectacle
Yeah,
when they see that
and
they're
it's over.
okay.
You know.
The channel in question, News Live, their reporter Gaurav Jyoti Niyog resigned first,
Yeah.
and later the editor Atanu Bhuyan resigned. I mean, where do you think the role of the editor or the management of the channel comes in? Do you think if the reporter was, as Akhil Gogoi said, a friend of one of the accused and was a part of instigating the mob, does the responsibility end with him, or does responsibility end with management or the owners of the channel? Where does it rest?
See, I would say the responsibility of what actually happens on ground is very difficult to lay that at the editor or management's door. But when a footage like that comes into office and you analyze why is it this way, it's an interesting insight about what actually is going on in News Live. And again, this is based on, what people are saying. It's off record, so I'm always a bit uncomfortable with within institution off record remarks, because you need to have the courage to at least own up to it. But as I'm told, and the source of this unedited footage has actually come from within the office, because within the office there are two sets of people. One who's very uncomfortable with the kind of editorial framework within which reporting in News Live is happening, and one which is comfortable with the moral policing that they've been doing.
The unedited footage that you've seen has been, so to speak, leaked by people
from within the office.
Okay.
Has been leaked to Akhil.
Officially, management did not want this footage out there.
I would imagine,
okay.
Because
they haven't volunteered to make it.
They haven't volunteered, and I would say that if the management did hear a voice saying make her naked or strip her, that there should have been a very stringent, internal inquiry about what really happened there. And so yes, I mean, to that extent, I would hold the management responsible. But a lot of the alchemy of what happens on ground is really beyond, the fine-tuned management of editors. But yes, there is a milieu, there's an ethos within which all reporters work. There is an office ethos. There's the framework as an institution defines for itself of what kind of reporting is kosher or not kosher for any office. And I think that's very clearly defined for every institution. So to that extent, I would again hold a management responsible. That I'm not sure a Tehelka journalist would watch a girl being molested for 45 minutes and not call the police.
Do you see yourself as management or a reporter? Because often there could be a conflict in what is desirable for both parties. Is it a tough call for you when, if you're a managing editor? What do you see yourself as, first of all?
First of all, I'm a journalist, and I'm fortunate to work with a, proprietor come founding publisher, editor, who also sees himself, Tarun Sehrawat, sees himself first as a journalist. Of course, you wear other hats, I also wear other hats. But my primary description, my primary allegiance, the primary impulse is that of a journalist. I'm also not an armchair editor, I'm a reporter myself, so much of what I ask of my reporters are things that I would do myself. So yes, I mean, there are times when there are difficult ropes you walk, but in the balance, I would always fall on the balance of the reporter-journalist.
Okay, I'm going to ask you these two questions. They're a follow-up of an interview you did with Mathew Samuel of Operation West End, Tehelka fame. They should be too, Tarun, but since Tarun's not here, you are. I'm just going to ask you. One, he had said that he did an investigative piece before Operation West End, for which he's been charged with the Official Secrets Act, and 3 of the sources who had leaked the documents to your publication, which was a website at the time, were also suspended or put in prison and arrested for a while. And he said he's fighting the case himself. Is that true? And if that is true, why isn't the Tehelka, as the organization that commissioned that story, fighting the litigation aspect of that?
You're right, Tarun would be able to answer the details of this better, but I know the broad strokes of what happened. The Official Secrets Act is a case that the Tehelka itself is also still fighting, Tarun still has to go for anticipatory bail. Almost every case that every journalist in Tehelka who's with us or without us and who have passed on, Tehelka is left with all that litigation itself, so we are still party to many cases that we are still continuing to fight. That particular case, it's not true that Samuel Mathew was not given any money. There were months on end when he was not in touch with us. But there was an acute shortage of resources at that time because Operation West End had already happened, and Tehelka itself was very beleaguered. The office had to shut down, and we were pretty much selling our tables and computers, and just to keep ourselves going. We didn't have a STD line. From 120 people, we were down to 4 or 5 people.
Sure.
In bits and pieces. Eventually, there were just 4 or 5 of us left. For almost 2 or 3 years, Tehelka had absolutely no resources. And
once you did,
the entire team had kind of just fallen apart. We were grappling, all of us, differently for lifelines. And at that time, most of the lawyers did fight pro bono cases for us, and I would imagine a lot of them did that for Samuel as well. Perhaps he had travel logistics and things to pay for. To the limited extent that I do know, he was given a certain amount of money, and then there were months on end when he wasn't in touch. Recently, I think he came in touch with Tarun again.
Yeah,
and
he said recently Tarun offered him.
Yeah, and then Tarun said, I'm really sorry, but I didn't know that you were struggling yourself, and if you had picked up the phone, as I have scrounged for many years to put together resources for many things that Tehelka has needed, I would have done that for you, but you were off radar. If you'd picked up the phone and called, I would have done something for you, But yes, he was off radar, and you have to understand the magnitude of the onslaught at that time, to understand the debris and the chaos, to understand some of the oversights that may have happened then, If Samuel feels this, I know that Tarun has met him recently and said, if you ever need it, please just call.
Right. Okay, now I'd like to speak about Tarun Sehrawat, your very young and apparently very talented photographer, photojournalist, who died after coming back from the interiors of a Maoist-infested region. That created a flurry of articles, many kind of pointing fingers at Tehelka for how they handled it. Many saying that when you go out as a journalist, you know the risks, it's your call and you can't blame anyone. But primarily, the first thing I want to ask you is, in Tarun's case, is there, and you can answer specifically for Tehelka and for other organizations, a certain process or a standard operating procedure where they are given training for eventualities such as the ones that they faced? I mean, how does it work on the ground before someone says that I'm going to go out there in the middle of nowhere where these are the risks involved? Are they given some sort of a tutorial?
Aditya, this is such a armchair view of journalism that, I held my silence at that time, because the flurry of articles, as you put it, that criticized Tehelka was so patently absurd, because they didn't even follow the first rule of journalism, which is please phone the people you're writing about. There is so much of factual errors in those pieces. They have jumped to assumptions. They did not call me. They did not call Sehrawat's family. They did not call Tusha. You're pontificating about the ethics of how an institution should function when you can't even do a baseline courtesy of phoning the people that you've spoken about. The other reason why I did not combat, and it's very easy to combat a lot of, the speculative laxity of Tehelka that was put out then, because I did not want to make this a reporter versus editor situation. There were 2 people that I'm extremely fond of, both Tusha and Tarun Sehrawat. Not just as great reporters, they were people that I'm personally very, very fond of. They are people who have been to Chhattisgarh many times themselves, been into the interiors many times themselves. Chhattisgarh is an area where I personally, many members of Tehelka's team have reported intensely. Our learnings from that episode are completely different, I do not believe, and I say that with utter responsibility and awareness, I do not believe that any editor sitting anywhere in the globe can be ubiquitously knowledgeable about the circumstances into which their reporters will go.
Sure.
As I said, I don't want to make this a reporter edit, and at that time Tusha, was so vulnerable and so crushed that I felt that this entire discourse, would just create walls where did not need to be walls, But I know that she feels that. There are other reporters
she
in my
what?
That there is very little that an editor sitting in Delhi can tell a reporter in Chhattisgarh more than what the reporter themselves know. The great gap that came out of this is actually a gap for Indian media. Even for ourselves, my great learning, my shock were 2 things. One is that we believe we understand India. It's our own backyard. You never look at health issues. I would like to know a single other reporter that has really looked at health issues. When you go to Kashmir, do you ask any doctor, what disease may I catch there? When you go to Meghalaya, do you ever pick up the phone and ask a doctor? Because this is your own domain. If I was sending a reporter to Africa, I may have thought of saying, take a yellow fever shot. The great learning from this is that you do not know your own backyard. Number two is the fact that we have always focused on conflict in Chhattisgarh. There is actually another massive tragedy playing itself out there, which is the health issue in Chhattisgarh. And there's almost no coverage of it. It was a blind spot for Tehelka itself. Aman Sethi, who's the other reporter who wrote a lot from that, who reports a lot from that region, wrote about the accidental nature by which he gathered information about malaria. And that, Aditya, is the way any reporter would ever get information about a place. Today, so he said, I've never got a to-do list from an editor. And the fact is that you will never be able to get a to-do list from an editor.
Yeah, I'll just let me stop you there 1 second. I know there are international channels and publications that have a standard operating procedure when they send journalists to, like you said, if you send them overseas, of course, then it's this alien foreign place you're sending them to, you take your own country for granted. However, they do have a certain standard operating procedure sensitizing people that if you're in the market in XYZ, you do not get combative. The culture there is such. They have a policy of, are we going to negotiate in case you are kidnapped? Such things, some of them are policies on what do we do in this eventuality, and some of them are, this is for your well-being. We do know that Maoists do kidnap people for negotiation. Is there a no negotiation policy in Tehelka or in other organizations, and should there be? What is the stance? Say X is kidnapped by the Maoists. What is the policy then? Is there a standard policy?
Well, yeah, the one thing that I did say to the couple of people, for instance, 79 was one of the few people who bothered to call before she wrote a piece. And I did say that, yes, there are some learnings to be taken, which is that there aren't editorial positions on issues like this. Like, for instance, on kidnap. Maybe on some of it. I think one grey area which we don't have, although, a lot of these people assume that Tehelka just threw up its hands. That's not true. There's no medical insurance for our reporters, and I think that's something that we should take care of. Of course, we took care of every hospital bill, and we would do that yet again, no matter what.
But you should institutionalize it with an insurance policy.
We should institutionalize it. Maybe some of this in terms of kidnapping, is something that one should think about. By and large, Aditya, the fact of the matter is that we do live with a sense of immunity, That's what I mean about being in your own backyard. We are not going to a Taliban area where you don't know who they are and they don't know who you are.
But surely the risks of this area are, many people have written about, like Rahul Pandita's article, and he said that he knew the other reporter and he was aware of the risks. They carry certain medicines, the cocktail of 2 or 3 tablets that they do take.
But Rahul Pandita's article, and I'm sorry to say this, is one of the most offensive articles I've read, because he did not bother to phone. When he based it on an edit piece that I wrote, where I was not giving an FIR or an inventory of things that my journalists carried. And it was merely a heartfelt piece about 2 people who went in there. The only thing they didn't take was prophylactics. But again, I'm saying that people who are commenting all this now are commenting from the vantage point of fate, actually, Aditya.
Sure.
Because Javed, another photographer who puts his life on the line all the time over there, wrote to me with great candor, saying that a lot of these people really don't know what they're talking about, because I've taken prophylactics every week that I've been there, and once I was in the interiors, I was very, very badly hit. The difference is that he survived and Tarun didn't.
Yeah, you can't remove the risk, but you can minimize it.
Yes.
And you can take precautions.
The point I'm trying to make, Aditya, is that I actually don't feel defensive about this situation. What we've taken from it are learnings. The learnings I would give my reporter today, any reporters, and that's the email I sent out, is that I am not going to try and play ubiquitous God. Ashish Khaitan, an investigative journalist and investigations editor who puts his life on the line every week. I had a discussion with him and I said, Ashish, did we have some blind spots? And he said, have no qualms about it, because there is no way, that we are not running a nursery.
Sure.
So there's no way that, actually, I've had journalists who've got into altercations with mining guards on ground, and it has got very heated. There's no way I can train a journalist beforehand that if a mining guard comes at you, you must do this.
Right.
You must
there's certain things you take, but what I'm saying is
let me finish. So the one thing that I did say to our reporters is, do not take for granted our own country. Do not take for granted even a place like Chennai. When you land there, you please ask a doctor what you should do. So it's not that I can now tell you when you go to Karnataka, take this pill. When you go to Meghalaya, do this. When you go to Nagpur, do this. I can't do that. What I can say is a standing instruction that please don't imagine health is a blind spot. Pick up a phone, call a local doctor and ask what you should do. About the other questions you're raising about kidnapping, so much of this, Aditya, depends on the sources you have on ground. No journalist is ever asked by an institution to take anything beyond reasonable risk. No journalist, at least not in Tehelka, is ever pushed to do more than what their own appetite tells them.
The risk has to be visible in black and white. What I'm saying is that in India we used to generalities, like when you go out,
Yeah, no, but I'm saying so much of this, why we do not worry about being kidnapped, is that no journalist actually goes, we're not going in there like, greenhorn tourists. We're not Americans in India, You do go in with sources. You do go in with local people who know the lay of the land. You've gone in having established some contact, So it's not that you're going out there hunting for a tiger to get
I understand,
you.
but that is the effectiveness of journalists. What I'm saying is, like you said a short while ago, finally the buck does stop with the management. There's an ethos. Everyone works in a context.
Yeah.
So yes, there's some journalists who will take a bigger risk. Some will take a lesser risk. That is different from people. And also, if someone's going to Nagpur or Meghalaya, one doesn't say that this is the pill you need for place X or place Y. But there are certain places where the risks of something are way higher. For example, if someone is going to the northeast, you will say don't travel between these and these. I've been there, on other shoots. And the risks there are different. The same thing doesn't apply for
that's what I'm trying to tell you, that it's not an editor who's going to do that, and any journalist who actually is on ground will scoff at all this ninny-pinny, mothering of people. If you're a journalist out there reporting, you're not a child, you're an adult, you're taking a conscious decision to go somewhere. And what I'm trying to tell you is that no journalist, Nora Ephron, a veteran war journalist, just lost her life in Syria.
Yeah.
Daniel Pearl lost his life in Afghanistan. Were these babes in the woods? They were not. They took reasonable risk. Tushar and Tarun Sehrawat.
So I'm just clarifying. I'm not saying that they won't happen. I'm saying, of course, it'll happen.
Yes,
I'm merely saying, is there? I know New York Times has a policy.
I'm trying to tell you that I do not think of our journalists as children. When they go on ground, of course, they inform themselves. This was a massive blind spot. The learning is, this is a massive media blind spot, and I said it was a news blip.
Sure.
And I don't really just want to secure ourselves as journalists. There's much discourse about should you take a mosquito net and but you can be bitten by a mosquito during the day. It's not only that when you lie down at night that a mosquito will bite you. And number two, Aditya, as journalists, I personally will feel extremely uncomfortable lying inside a mosquito net while many tribals lie next to me out in the open.
That is another. I remember during the first Gulf War, the BBC journalist, the anchor was Nick Gowing, and one of the journalists got really upset because the hotel they were staying in was bombed, and he threw a fit on air. And Nick Gowing said, let's not confuse our hardship with what the people face every day. So I understand that. I'm merely saying, and I won't press on this after this, that your piece said that they pressed on in spite of the fact that they'd run out of water or X. As an organization, at some point, you say, no, you don't press on, you turn back. You said they didn't turn back. Finally, fine, it's their decision and it's person on the ground's decision. But at some point, do you think you should have a policy that if X happens, from there, you turn back. We don't care, you turn back. We do not authorize you to go on after that.
Yeah. But two things on that, Aditya, again, is that so much of this is the luxury of over-the-table conversation.
Yeah, sure. I'm just saying, should that be there going forward?
But I'm saying that those, by nature, will always be generalized instructions. When Tushar and Tarun were sent out, of course, and I don't even need to say that because they too know that, the doctrine of reasonable risk is the doctrine on which we all operate, And I did tell Tushar that under no circumstance, if you feel even the slightest sense of danger, if you feel the slightest sense of grayness about where you're at, just turn back. The story is not that important, This is the first time, Aditya, and this is something I really want to say very, very emphatically. If Tarun Sehrawat had recovered believe you me, none of these discussions would have happened.
Sure.
So the luxury of these learnings, the luxury of these learnings actually are emanating from great disaster. You know, there was another Open magazine themselves have a journalist who fell ill. Did they write about it? Did they give out great learnings
Absolutely.
Of,
what I'm saying is something like this becomes a talking point only because something extreme happens. Just like you said, what is the media's role? The first question was because this girl was almost stripped in public. That is when the reflection happened. The problem didn't arise when that girl was stripped in public. The camera's role existed before that. It only became a talking point after that incident. So I understand this will become a talking point after the incident. It's unfortunate. There was a young, wonderful boy like him and he belonged to your organization, so you're going to get a lot of the attack.
No,
so that's inevitable.
I don't mind the attack, but I'm just saying that so much of this, and a couple of the journalists who wrote about it are people who, as I said, you know, the one reason, and before this Tehelka has been under attack, and you know, there are times when I've put out an official response. I did not at this point because I found so much of the argument spurious. You know, Sevanti Nainan, who, as I said, at least did the courtesy of phoning me, ended her piece by saying the role of an editor is to restrain the enthusiasm of a reporter. I mean, if that's the ethos of how you think, you know, great journalism gets done, that's not the ethos by which we live. Journalists who work with Tehelka, you know, understand that this is an institution that goes the extra mile.
Which is fine, as long as that is a stated policy. What I'm saying is that's fine.
Within this institution, there are journalists who are, you know, who feel scared to even go do a mining story. There are journalists, and I will not name them, who have done, you know, seemingly explosive stories but have not had the courage to follow up on it. And they are allowed that space given their temperament. Sure. But I have had journalists like Rana Ayub, a Muslim girl reporting out of Gujarat, doing some great work. Many of the encounter cops are actually in jail because of her work. There's Ashish Khaitan, who's just done a story on UP gangsters. And you know, the point is that this is a luxurious conversation because I may give out all these instructions, my journalist may still be bumped off 7 weeks later for something that
like I said, it does not eliminate risk.
It does not eliminate
Nothing will eliminate.
I'm merely saying, what is the risk we can anticipate?
And does the person know what the person is in for? For example,
and now just to crystallize it, because you know, as I'm saying, I do not at all want to look defensive on this. We have taken some huge learnings from this. The learnings are, I'm going to just crystallize it. India is not my backyard. There are great areas of blind spots. We who think we are frontier journalists were operating really, you know, what I look back now as a tourism zone. We did not understand the scale of disease in this area. So yes, that is one big learning. Number 2 learning is to spell out to my reporters what was earlier tacit. And number 3 learning is to perhaps have insurance for our journalists. And beyond that, Aditya, there really cannot be, you know, overall policies for risk. Beyond a point, it is a question of individual appetite. It is a question of how much do you want to get a story? Does an institution push you into doing that? That would be wrong. Do you take a reasonable informed risk and go get a story? All stories operate out of going the extra mile. Okay. And there are too many journalists who are pontificating today who only go to district headquarters and get, you know, I have seen reportage on that Abujmar case, Operation Abujmar, which Tusha went to investigate and Tarun went to investigate. And a lot of reporting on that has happened from CRPF handouts, from district headquarters, and has been passed off.
Which is not unusual in that case. That's happening across the board.
But I don't consider that frontier journalism. Okay. Tehelka does different kind of journalism. We have paid a very heavy price for it. I think the radar on that should be that the family concerned does not feel that no stone was unturned. I just met the father 2 days ago, again yesterday, and he was saying my child was not a child. He went there knowing the terrain he was going into. He did what he knew being an adult. Ye bachcha nahi hai. And if a father can say that, I respect that, you know, because that is the framework within which the extra mile journalism does get taken.
Sure.
And
that varies
is,
from person to person.
Yes, and as I said, that does not exonerate myself as an editor. Like, as I've said, there's
I
been
would consider a
introspections.
22-year-old a child. You know, you may not, X may. So that, I mean, that's
you may,
subjective.
but I'm saying, you know, by that logic, there are many 60-year-olds here who will never go out. I mean, some people ask us, why didn't you send a seasoned journalist with them? Excuse me, there are many seasoned journalists who will not do this journalism.
And no, that is a different call. I don't think that is.
I'm saying if you're out there doing this journalism, you're adult enough, you know, and that I will reiterate is not to put a wall between reporters and myself.
Sure.
I do a lot of this myself, and my reporters would vouch for the fact that if they're ever in trouble, I don't think they found us missing, you know.
Okay.
This is just a terrible tragedy. In a strange way, he's paid the ultimate price of a journalist. His death has flagged an epidemic in these regions, which without his death, many of us would still not be writing about. On that very Sunday, after Tarun Sehrawat's death, a national daily, why not? Well, let me name it, Times of India, carried a small news brief, 3 inches on their news brief side. 259 people in that very time died of encephalitis in Bihar and UP. What was the attention that it merited? 3 inches. Did national media carry it?
But Tarun's death did spur them on
I'm
to-
saying even Tarun's death has not created that degree of awareness and commitment. Indian media does not focus on unglamorous killers like tuberculosis, like cerebral malaria, like encephalitis, like diarrhea, like malnutrition. Do we write about these things? I'm saying is Tarun Sehrawat's death is one death.
Has this death actually spurred Tehelka on to
I'm just
carry
telling you.
pieces on this?
I'm just telling you. This is 1 month old. You know, we caught our breath already. One of my reporters is, and when we write it, you will see it. We are working on a massive story on the death and disease that ordinary tribals, ordinary Jawans are facing every day of their lives there. I'm appalled that the only learning the rest of the media seems to have taken is how do we secure ourselves. Till today, have we seen a spate of cover stories on cerebral malaria? The fact that many families there are losing, you know, I'm saying that that information has been brought home to me as an editor. I will pursue that story relentlessly now as we have done conflict.
You had spoken about the pathetic state of investigative journalism as well. During the Guardian's Nick Davis opened her speech by saying that contrary to some of the optimism on this panel, I think journalism in India is pathetic state. That's what you said during this discussion on journalism. Now, are you optimistic about the future, or do you think, I mean, even your heartfelt take on how the kind of stories that mainstream journalism, mainstream media does report, I didn't see much optimism there. You think we're learning and are going to get better, or you think it's just going to get worse because journalism has become a corporate act rather than a political act?
You know, I feel that there's been some changes in the Indian media, and first of all, Aditya, is very uncomfortable to talk this, you know, because immediately there is a sense that I'm somehow accruing to ourselves, or you know, a sort of
I think
greater
that'll
pomposity,
go.
you know?
I think that is
So-
the problem
so
all
let me-
journalists
let
have.
me-
That
let me-
don't lecture us. We know
Yeah,
best.
so let me
that's a
let me
journalism
first of
syndrome.
all lay out that I understand the risk factor from which I'm speaking. You know, to speak about our fraternity is to assume you know, the pulpit, which is uncomfortable to do. So let me acknowledge that discomfort first. But over and above that, I do feel that, you know, there are certain good things that are happening to Indian media, which is that it has become more combative. It is asking more questions than the lull in the late 90s and early 2000s when all coverage was only about shining India and, you know, how well
And Tehelka
India
was
was
made an
doing.
example of.
And, you know, yeah, I mean, I think at that time we were the big counter narrative, and there were certain other publications that were, but we were the counter narrative. We were focusing on simmering India, to use these, you know, neat phrases. But I do believe since then much has changed. There is, you know, much more focus on some big issues. And I'm not sure that that has happened voluntarily. Many of those big issues have just become burning issues, you know, and you are forced, for instance, on land or on tribal rights or on, you know, many of these things that
Or the
people
Maoist
now are
problem.
focusing on. It's just that these things have forced themselves onto your face, so you will report on it, you know. Insofar as investigative reporting is going on, Aditya, I think Tehelka itself has evolved a lot. When we look back to Operation West End, we made many mistakes. We don't make those mistakes anymore. We are more stringent about ourselves. It is an ongoing process. Why I feel that we are teetering on both the good and bad of investigative journalism is that today a lot of noise passes for investigative journalism. You know, there's a lot of disproportionate noise, a very black and white positions that are taken, runaway journalism that happens, you know, particularly on electronic media, I think because of the nature of it. And I think a lot of electronic media journalists themselves feel the push of that. There have been many stories where you feel that something mammoth has hit you, you know, like a Hassan Ali story, for instance. I remember all of last year, India was held hostage to this idea of this one money launderer who's sitting
had
on
the figures
40,000
were,
crores.
yeah.
You know, I mean, there were just spiraling figures. It was being passed off as great adversarial journalism, great investigative journalism. It was not. And Tehelka then took a very unpopular stand. We got extremely detailed figures. We got letters from Swiss banks, from the Enforcement Directorate, which basically said that yes, this man is a scamster, but he's
But
not
the
a
figures
man.
are nowhere close
the
to what
figures
you're
are
talking
nowhere
about.
close,
Sure.
and actually he's a hot air case, you know.
Yeah.
But there was this whole how this country was just caught in that rhetoric, and so that's what I'm saying, that today we're doing better on many counts. And let's not undermine the role of the electronic media. You know, today it is the most powerful interlocutor in our
absolutely.
society. It is, it is the first witness on many cases. We have a sense that we are a very violent society. Why do we have that sense? Not because it was not happening earlier, but because there's
We
greater
see it.
exposure now. We are
Sure.
seeing it more. And so even while I critique it, you know, I feel that the electronic media is just the most important pole in our society today, which is perhaps why we talk so much about it, you know. Even more than print, that is the medium, you know. So I'm saying we have to bring back, just again to crystallize a lot of rambling conversation, is adversarial journalism for sure, asking questions for sure, but complexity and proportionate reporting, you know, a proportionate editorial line, I think are two qualities that we do need to create more. And at Tehelka, we sort of struggle for that all the time. I'm not saying that we have arrived there, but at least we acknowledge it as values we want to inculcate, you know. So we are seen as very
That is the
adversarial
primary
journalists.
vision.
Yeah, but today every journalist who joins us is told, let's not assume the great mantle that just because we're journalists, you know, we're going to sort of thrust, you know, the camera into and have this judgmental tone to everything. Complexity and proportionate reporting are as much a part of our DNA today as just plain adversarial journalism was when we began, you know. So that's that learning process that we have, and I hope we'll keep evolving. You know, I'm not saying we're a finished product. We're not a finished institution.
I don't think anyone will be, but thank you for your time, Shoma. And not that it's important, my name is Abhinandan, not Aditya. That's fine.
Sorry.